Hi everyone and welcome to Web is Step Tutorials. This is Ahmed Fakhr and this tutorial about flat list in React Native. Now what we will discuss in this tutorial. In this tutorial you will learn the component state and lifecycle, React Native elements library, FlatList component, and finally networking with Fetch API. Now let's start it. Hi again. Now before discussing the flat list itself, let's take an overview about lists in React Native. There is two types on React Native lists. The first one is the flat list. The second, which is section list. In this tutorial, we will discuss flat list, and in the next tutorials, we will discuss section list. So what is a flat list? A flat list is a performant interface for rendering simple flat lists supporting the most handy features. As example, it is a fully cross-platform that work with iOS and Android in the same manner. It has an optional horizontal mode for horizontal lists. It is supported a multi-column. It is supported header, footer, and separator. It has also the scroll loading event and pull to refresh. Now let's see that practically. Here we created a simple example for the flat list in React Native to easily understand how it works. We will discuss it line by line. Here we import React from React and flat list and style sheet from React Native. We should load the flat list to use it as a component. After this, we load list and list item from React Native elements. Why we use React Native elements? To simplify the customization for the flat list styling. And what is the React Native elements? It is a UI toolkit library that has many components to help us to create a cross-platform designed component. Now let's stick to the list and list item components. Go to view components and here you will see lists. This is the view for the lists. And as you see, each user, each row in this list called as a list item. And as you see in the left menu, there is many components. Now let's see how to install this library. First, you will go to React Native CLI. If you are using Expo, you will follow these steps. But because we are using React Native CLI, you will click on this tab and go to these steps. The first step is to install React Native elements by using npm install or yarn if you are using yarn. The second step is to install React Native vector icons. If you remember, we are used React Native vector icons in the previous tutorial. If you remember, we have used React Native vector icons in the previous tutorial, which is tab navigator. So you will install the React Native vector icons by using yarn or using npm, and don't forget to link the React Native vector icons. Link will put these fonts or icons into the assets for your project. But remember also, we will go to app, build, and open build.gradle, and we should apply the fonts in build.gradle into app. So to do this, we should add this line. If you don't see any icons in your example, this is because you don't add this line here, or you forget to link the React Native vector icons. But how to ensure this? Just go to src, the source, into the app and assets, and you'll see fonts, and all these fonts related to React Native vector icons. Then we created a new component with the name users. Into this component we have the state, which hold all the data for the flat list. But first, what is the meaning for the state? In the regular human meaning, it's mean the current behavior for someone, but in the web and the mobile developing meaning, it's mean the current data for the application. So if you has a login screen as example with username and password inputs and you press login, then the current state is you are login. Here all the data which we need in our example is the seed, which is a parameter which used by the API to identify the same users for your application. It can be any pattern. Then the page, which started with 1 because we will load the first page and we will paginate after this. Then the users, which hold all the users data into this array. We use isLoading to check if the data will load from the server. IsRefreshing to check if we refresh the page. After this, we have two functions to handle the events. The first one to handle the refresh, the second to handle the load more. The first one has the setState, which is the function that responsible to update the current state for the application. So when we refresh the flat list, it will go to the seed and add number 1. So the seed will be 2. Then you will see that the data changed. Then it will update the isRefreshing from false to true. Why that? To display the activity indicator until finish loading all the data. Then it will call load users function to load the data from the server. This is the handle refresh. The second function, which handle more. When we scroll into the bottom of the application, it will change the page. This is the page object and add 1 to it. So we go to the page number 2, and for every scroll it will add number 1 to the page. So the page will change it, and then it will load the users for this page. This is the handle load more. Then we have the component didMount method. Into this function we load the users also. But what is the component didMount? It is a built-in method for the life cycle into React Native and React. Let's see a side note about the life cycle into React, and we'll complete after this. Here into the React, I really recommended to take a look into React Component. Into React Component, we will see that there is a life cycle for the component. The life cycle has a methods. The life cycle methods divided into the main 4 stages. The first one is mounting, and after this it will be the updating and the unmounting. Also, there is error handling cycle. Now, mounting called when you create the component in the first time. It will start with the constructor, then component will mount, and then render the component. Finally, it will call component.mount. So if you want to initialize the state, as example, you will call the constructor before calling the render. And if you want to pass some data after rendering the component, you call component.mount. These 4 functions called one time when you create or mount the component in the first time. Updating called every time when you want to re-render the component. Unmounting when you finish or remove the function from the DOM. This is a simple brief, and I recommend you again to read the component life cycle for more understanding. Then we go to load users. Into load users, we pass users seed page to the state, and then we call set state to update the loading with the true to tell the indicator that the data now fetching from the API. Here is the fetch, which a method that responsible to call the API, which is random user.me API. This is the link for the API, and this is the function that loads the data and fetches the data from the API. Let's take a look for the API at first. There is the API, and it will return the results which hold all these users data. It is a random data for the users. As example, here we have gender male, name, which holds the title, first name, Valentine, last name, Garrido, location, and email. And into the login information, we have the username, password, salt, MD5, etc., etc. We can copy this data and paste it to the jsonformatter.org. Here we paste the data, and it will clarify the JSON data as you see here. The username, the password, the MD5, and this is the picture image. This is the image for the 3 sizes, large, medium, and thumbnail. This is the data. Now let's take a look about Fetch API. If you go to Facebook React Native documentation and under networking, you will see the documentation for the Fetch API, which an API that's supported by React Native to fetch the data through the network. If you open the Fetch API, you will read the full description about the Fetch API. But as example, it will work like the Ajax. It will has the method. You can use post or get or whatever, and in the header you will select the content type with JSON, and the body you will send the parameter. Then you can handle the response as a JSON and return it here, or in the catch. If the API has an error, you will catch the error and print it with the console.error. Here we will call the random user API and pass the parameter seed, which is specified for this API, and we start with number 1, and in the page we start with 1, and in the results we want to be 20 result, and it will return the data. Then we turn it into a JSON data. Then in the set state we will update the state objects with the data that returned from this API. So in users, we make a condition to check the current page. If we on the first page, then pass the results that return from the API to the users. Else, update the users with the new results. Then we update the is refreshing to false to stop the indicator and return the data. Else, as we said before, it will catch the error and print it. After this, we will go to the render function. Into render function, we set the is refreshing and users to the state. Here we have the list which work as a container, and into the list we have a flat list, the component that we see here. FlatList component has many properties. The first one is the data. Here we pass all the data which was used into the flat list, and here we pass users that hold all our data, and in the render item which work as a for loop or a mapping that take the users and loop into this data as item by item. So imagine this, it will take the users and it takes the first item and pass the first item, the first user, to render item. Into this item it will load every user one by one. It will go to the first user and load list item. And as you remember, the list item related for React Native elements, and it has its own properties. Let's see round avatar as example. It will put the image into a round, then the title, and we pass the first name for the user into this title to appear here. If you remember, here the name, and we go to the first, which is Emily as example. Here we pass the item and the name and the first. Then it will take the email into the subtitle, which will appear under the name here, like this. This is the subtitle. Then into the avatar we pass the picture thumbnail, and as you see here, this is the thumbnail. As you see here, item, picture, and thumbnail. And after ending the first rendering for this item, it will go to the second item, and etc until finish. The key extractor, it is about the flat list properties. If you remember, the flat list has many props here. As you see here, the key extractor. But the question is why we use key extractor props into the flat list. The flat list could be have a large sets of data. So to help React Native to manage the performance for the flat list, you should pass a unique key to the key extractor. And email here, we used it as a unique key extractor. But you can use any key as you want. As example, you could use salt or MD5 or SH1 or whatever. Then into the refreshing properties to handle the refresh into the flat list. When you pass is refreshing in the first time, as you see here, it will be false. So there is no indicator. But how to handle what's happening on refresh? There is a properties for on refresh, and we call handle refresh that we discussed before here. When we refresh, we call handle refresh. Then on reached, which handle the scrolling into the bottom, and in the bottom, as we see here is some simple styling. But for the video length, I will skip this part because it is not dealing about this styling. You can read it from the documentation. Let's now test the example. React Native run Android. Let's open the emulator. Loading. And as you see, this is the list here. This is the avatar as rounded here, round avatar, and the title here. This is the title, the subtitle here, and the thumbnail here. And when refreshing, let's see, as you see, this is the indicator, refreshing for the indicator. And if we scroll, let's scroll fast to see what happened. Let's scroll fast. Fast scrolling, and this is on end reached to handle the load more. If you see that when we scroll, it will stop for a second and load more users. Scroll, it will stop seconds and load more. As you see the scroll. I hope this will help you, and I will put the link for the code in the description. Don't hesitate. If you have any question, leave a comment on the tutorial, and if you like this video, support me with like and share and subscribe for the next tutorial. Thank you for watching. See you next. Bye.